Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is my November reading wrap up. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's this new YouTube endeavor I've been doing, but I finished more books this month than I have in a while, except for October. October and November were my two highest reading months for the year. I finished 14 books in November, so let's chat about them. I'm actually not going to tell you about all of them. I'm going to keep some of them for our winter reading guide for book talk, etc. That's coming out next week. I'll talk about it here and share more, but two of those books I read this month. They are brand new and they're coming out in 2025, but I will tell you about the rest of them that I read. I think I'm going to go in no particular order. I'm just going to start reading off what's in front of me. The first book that I'll talk about is Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanaugh. And this was one that my former co-host Renee brought to the show earlier in the year. And I was so curious about it. She has impeccable taste. Her handle is It's Book Talk on Instagram, and I'll link that below. But I always trust her when it comes to mystery and thriller because she's very particular. And this is one she loved. I'm happy to say I really loved it too. It is about two women who meet. They don't have any connection with each other except for the fact that they met in this particular grief group. And they decide to link up and sort of swap killings. Yes, it's a play on one of Alfred Hitchcock's movies. However, it's got its own spin. There are a lot of twists and turns in this one. I did the audio. I will admit at first I was like, all right, who's who? I had a little bit of trouble keeping up with everybody, but once I got the players correct, I was good to go. I thought this one was very satisfying, unexpected, a great thriller. I'm surprised this one's not on the Goodreads Best of 2024 mystery and thriller list because I definitely think it's better than some of those that were listed. Speaking of Hitchcock, this is a good tie-in because my next one is The Hitchcock Hotel by Stephanie Roble. This was my first time with the author. I quite liked it. I was very impressed with it. It's about this quirky man who runs a Hitchcock-themed hotel, and he invites his friends from college to stay for a weekend. They have not seen each other for many, many years, and sort of you figure out why they all come, because at first it's like, why would they show up to this? But you figure it out. And they come to the weekend, and you can see that somebody is sort of fucking with them. You don't know why, you don't know who, but it's very unsettling. The play on this one is of Psycho, and you're led to believe that there may or may not be a dead body in this book at some point. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was so easy to get through. Loved the characters. You find out their motivations. When I say I loved the characters, I should say they're pretty terrible, but I loved watching them and trying to figure out what they were going to do. I enjoyed it. Overall, a really, really good time. Highly recommend it. Another book that Renee brought to the show previously that I was so curious about is The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller. I had previously DNF'd it because initially I thought the writing was so pretentious, and she goes skinny dipping in the very beginning and this dragonfly lands on her nipple. And I said, I'm good, I'm out, I don't need to know the rest of it. But that was short-sighted of me because I loved this. It is one of my favorites of the month. I'm going to give this 5 stars. It's this complex story about a woman who is in the very beginning of the story just having come off of sleeping with her best friend who is married, and her husband is also in the cabin with their mom and kids. It's really bad, right? But the book works backward. You figure out why these two are so imprinted on each other. There were secrets. They grew up together, and this book is all about what might have been and what would you do with sort of this love triangle. And I was so surprised by this. I think this would make a fantastic book club book. I want to talk about the ending with someone, but I loved it. I'm so glad I went back to it. Another book that it took me a couple tries to get into was The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson. I mean, look at this one. I started this when I first got it. It came out, I think in May or something earlier this year, and it was too much for me then, but I was reading this at the beginning of this month, right during the election, and I actually liked the timing because what this is about, it's about the time between Lincoln's election and the inauguration and sort of the unrest that's going on in the United States during that time. This one is meticulously researched. I really enjoyed a lot about it. I mean, you can see the bibliography is like this long. So I will say, if you're going to do this, I recommend the audio. The audiobook narrator is Will Patton, and he does a lot of Stephen King's books. So for me, it was easy to listen to him, easy to sink into. I really appreciated his narration, and I would not have gotten through it without. I learned a lot. I see history repeats itself. There were a lot of terrible characters, and I don't know, it sent me down several Google rabbit holes, and I enjoyed it. It was a bit dry though, so I would give this about 3.5, 4 stars for me. All right, another one that I read this month that my co-host Hannah brought to the show is The Night Guest. This one is by Hildur Knudstottir, and it is set in Iceland. It's about this woman. It's a mystery thriller, and it's super short. I want to say about 3-ish hours on audio. It's about this woman who has this condition where she's constantly so exhausted. No doctor's able to figure out what's going on. She keeps seeing them, keeps demanding that they do more tests, and finally they come to find out they recommend that she gets more exercise. So she buys like a pedometer, wears it while she is sleeping, and she figures out that she's walking something like 30, 40,000 steps in her sleep, like when she's supposed to be sleeping. So the book sort of unravels what is going on with her. This is horror, and it's definitely sort of body horror, and I'll leave it there because there are some reveals at the end. It's one of those books. I actually picked this up because one of our patrons said it was a WTF did I just read book, and I sort of love those. So I grabbed it. It was short, and I enjoyed it. Although the ending, I am a little bit unsatisfied with. I rated this one 3 stars. I'm not mad that I read it, but it's not a favorite of the year. One that could be on my favorite of the year list is There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension by Hanif Abdurraqib. This one, gosh, I just loved it. And it is a reflection on basketball, on growing up, on where he is from, on just sort of loving this thing and loving where you're from, even though people sort of talk badly about it. I think it's really interesting, the setup, the way that he set up the book. He set this up in quarters, just as you would a basketball game. And then there's some timeouts in between. It's poetic. He is a poet, I believe, and you can definitely tell that in the storytelling. It's actually really difficult to describe, and I can't even tell you why I loved it so much. I did the audio for this. He narrates, did a great job. I just really enjoyed just looking at this sort of subsection of life about people that I don't know personally, and he did a really good job with that. He also talks a lot about LeBron James and what he had done for the state of Ohio and Cleveland, and I enjoyed those pieces as well. 5 stars. One that I'm debating my rating on, and I actually cannot believe that I've even considered rating this 5 stars. It is a dark romance book called When She Unravels by Gabrielle Sands. It is a dark mafia romance. I had no business reading this. I picked it up because I was at a lit fest and this bookseller was there with their romance bookstore and basically said that she used to read horror, and I said, what do you read now? She talked about dark romance, and I said, just sell me on a book. What have you got? And this one is about this woman who is a mafia wife. She runs away for good reason, and she sort of saves a woman in the process of doing that. And she runs away to Spain, to Ibiza specifically, and has to figure out her new life while she's there. Of course, it's a romance, so she falls in love with somebody, and there's a lot of darkness. This one's very spicy. I would say it's like a 5 out of 5 in terms of the spice factor, but I don't read a lot in this space, so who knows. There's some drama as well. I really liked the mafia aspects of it. I was really curious about that. I think that was my favorite part, but I am shocked by how much I enjoyed this. This is your sign to read outside of your comfort zone. Another book that I really enjoyed that is very dark is My Darlings by Marie Still. This is about a serial killer who on the surface looks like this perfect PTA mom, but really she is a deep, dark serial killer, has all of these secrets. I enjoyed this. The audio was fantastic. You're seeing I did a lot of audiobooks this month. This one is pretty over the top. I would say, you have to sort of suspend your disbelief a little bit, but the enjoyment was worth it. It sounds like this might be a series or might be more books, in this world. So I'd be curious to pick those up. But overall, for what this was, I was very entertained. Speaking of dark, speaking of very entertained, my favorite book for the month is The Butcher by Jennifer Hillier. I am so glad that I picked this up. It's new-ish on audio, so thank you to Simon & Schuster Audio for giving me this copy because I picked it up on this road trip, could not put it down. It is about, a serial killer. You're noticing a theme, and it opens with this man who used to be the chief of police in Seattle. He is leaving the family home. He is moving to a retirement facility because he's aging. He's in his 80s, and his nephew is taking the house over. He has mixed feelings about this, but there are killings that are sort of coming about, and it's looking like it's being tied to a cold case that's been cold for decades. That's all I'll say. If you like dark books, if you like serial killer stories, I highly recommend this one. This was so propulsive. I could not turn the pages or listen fast enough. I listened over the course of 24 hours and I absolutely loved this. 5 stars, highly recommend. Another book that was out of my comfort zone that I really enjoyed, we're talking about out of our comfort zone reads on this week's episode of Book Talk, etc., which is why I had a couple, was The Davenports by Crystal Marquis. And this one was so lovely. It is YA historical fiction, and it is about the Davenport family. They made their fortune through the carriage industry. The patriarch was formerly enslaved, and he sort of worked his way up to having all of this wealth. And so it's set in 1910 Chicago, and I'm very glad to have learned about that time and place in the city that I'm from. It's about 2 sisters, Olivia and Helen, the brother and the best friend who sort of works as their in-house maid. It's about who they fall in love with. It's about falling in love with the wrong people. It's about balls, and this was a nice escape, but it also had a fantastic sort of tie-in. I feel like I learned a lot of history that I didn't know previously. And she says in the note from the author that this is inspired by a forgotten history, by the instances of Black success across the Midwestern U.S. cities during the early 1900s. And so the author goes in to tell sort of the families that inspired her to write this. I very much enjoyed it. Book 2 in the series came out recently in November, and this I think is a companion novel. So you get sort of a full, complete story here, but the next one is about some of the other characters. I liked it. 2 more nonfiction. I was very much into nonfiction this month. You have Above Ground by Clint Smith. He is a poet and he is fantastic. Another short book on audio. This is about him as he steps into his role as a new father and what that looks like. I picked this up. I'm actually really glad I did, because I was participating in the diverse books on Storygraph. There's like a challenge over there, and one of them is a BIPOC poem collection. And I thought, I don't read poetry, what am I going to read? But I read Clint Smith's book earlier this year. I'll put the title here because I'm blanking on it, but I loved that one. And so I thought, okay, I know the author. This is a good segue into maybe a little bit of poetry. So glad I did. I read this on lunch and I cried a little bit, so I don't recommend doing that. But I thought this one was excellent. I'm so glad I picked it up. Last is Framed by John Grisham and Jim McCloskey. I think this is my least favorite for the month, but that isn't a bad thing. It's a bummer. I mean, I will say it. It is about astonishing true stories of wrongful conviction. So obviously, going in that this is going to be intense. It's going to be sad. It is 10 stories about individuals that had been wrongly accused for crimes. They didn't commit them. And in many cases, they were framed by law enforcement, and some of them got out, some of them didn't. And it just put me in a bad mood when I was reading it. It was interesting, and it's not the author's fault. It just made me sad that these things, exist. Overall, though, I gave it like 3.5, 4 stars because I appreciate what they were trying to do. Do I recommend it? I don't know. I think if you're really interested in if you're really interested in this subject matter, then perhaps, but it was not my favorite. Overall, it was a fantastic reading month. I do think it's in part because of the, I know some people when they're like struggling, they lean away from books, like they get put into reading slumps. For me, I just read and read and read all month, and I really liked that. I also had some longer road trips that helped me out. I'm putting November reading aside. I'm very excited to read for December. I hit my reading goal. I'm read up for the podcast. So now I'm sitting around thinking, gosh, what am I going to read in December? I have to think about it. And I think I'll put together a December TBR focusing on some of the goals that I want to hopefully accomplish before 2024 is through. But you'll hear about that soon. Thank you so much for being here as always. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your favorite book of November was. I would love to know. Maybe I'll add it to my December TBR, but that's about it. Wanted to also introduce my sweater. I did link this on TikTok Shop because I was sent to me. It says all booked for Christmas, and then look at the back. And these are all titles that I picked, and you can tell the seller whatever titles you want to put on the back of your sweatshirt. Makes a great gift. All right, bye.